Welcome everybody. So this video, all we're going to do is we're going to take this cup here and we're going to apply a final coat of epoxy to it. Normally, this final coat over the decals that I put on here would be ready to go, but right along the top here in a couple spots just didn't sit well with me. So right along what I put on here just isn't quite as smooth as I want it to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to sand it down and then put another coat of epoxy on it. Now, one of the things that I've talked about in other videos is I like this ridge right here to still have a little bit of ridge to it. Now, what'll end up happening is applying a final coat to it or another coat is this will end up being smoother than I like it to be, but it will smoothen this out, give it a much better finish. The top layer here, I'm not too worried about this finish here because what I end up doing, and I'll show you this in another video, once we're finished and we take it off the spindle holder here, is I'll show you how to finish this off, get it back to the cup rim to where your lid stays flat, and we finish off the cup. So we'll get right into it. All right, so don't mind the mess in the background. So just like with any other cup sanding, start wherever you need to. I'm starting where the problem actually is, the biggest problem. Start at the top, and I'm using, once again, 220 grit sandpaper. Do nice tight circles. Right around the trouble area. And you can feel, as you're sanding, when you get to that trouble spot. So you just keep working the cup around. And the reason why I like to do it on the spindle is I have much more control over it. And I don't have to worry about my hand getting in the way and shifting my hand around. And it was such a tiny spot that I barely felt it as I went over it, and it came right off. And then you can see, as you come around, see right here, it's nice and clear. Right here it's dull from the sanding. So clear, dull, that means that that's a low spot. And that's not a big issue because the next layer of epoxy will fill that in. So once you get around, and as you know that you're into your next layers, where you know that there's not quite as much of an issue, you can go a little bit bigger of a circle, because now all you're trying to do is rough it up so that your next layer of epoxy sticks everywhere. Because the last thing you want is for your layer of epoxy to not stick. And then you want to keep adjusting your sandpaper to make sure that you got a good rough surface, because 220 grit isn't really thick. but you do want to make sure that the entire cup is roughed up. And I just use the sandpaper to hold it in place if I need to adjust my other hand. And don't forget the bottom. Because otherwise your epoxy won't get a good hold on the bottom. And do whatever works best for you. And that's one small spot on the bottom. I didn't really feel as I went to it, but I'm going to go around this bottom lip here one more time because I see some really smooth areas where the epoxy didn't settle out as smooth as I liked it to be. So I ended up with a lip on the bottom. And then I go one more time over the whole thing. To make sure I don't miss anything. And I see one little dimple here. See if I can get it up close here. There it is, right there. One little dimple where the epoxy set in. Not sure what caused that, but the next layer of epoxy should be able to fill that dimple in very nicely. And there we go. Set our sandpaper down. She's all sanded, ready to go. I don't feel... All right, welcome back. We've got our cup attached to the spindle here. We're going to turn it on, and the first step we're going to do, wipe it all down with some alcohol, because we want all that dust off. You can use a dry rag, but I found alcohol works the best because it ensures that all that excess will come off and it'll dry faster. And I've also already got the epoxy mixing there. And over on the other spindle is a cup still turning for another project that's going on. And as before, don't forget the bottom. And then what I like about these rags, you can always switch to a drier side if you want to make sure that you got all the dust off. And then you can see how everything is nice and dull in here, especially in the faces. But all that will clear right up once we put the layer of epoxy on there. All right, now we're back. We've got our epoxy all mixed up. And one of the things I like about using these little epoxy mixers in these little cups is that while it does produce bubbles, it minimizes the amount of bubbles because especially on these final uh, pours, you want to minimize the amount of bubbles. So at the very end, I will have to use my heat gun and I will show you that. But for now, let's just get into it. And for this final coating, you do want to try and make it, hopefully this is a final coating. We'll find that out after we get this poured. And apologize for the background noise if you can hear it. Being right next to the river, it's awful foggy today. So foghorns are going like there's no tomorrow. So you want to try and get this coating as thin as possible. So we'll see how well that goes today. Whoop, starting. It is pouring awful fast on me there. But just like every other pour, I try to keep it consistent. But the epoxy will fill in all those scrapes and scratches made from the sandpaper. So, and then you just want to, as you get your pours, you want to wait for the next gap where you don't have any epoxy. And while you're pouring your epoxy, it will start to get easier to pour as it begins its reaction and heats up. And then it would, if you're doing a bigger project, it will get harder to pour as it starts to start its initial set. So the thicker your mixture is, or the more epoxy you have in your cup, the faster it's going to start setting in your cup. So you just want to be careful about the amount that you mix up at one shot. So this epoxy that I like using is the full stuff that takes 24 to 48 hours to set, so it gives me a longer time to work with it. It's actually supposed to have a full half an hour working time. But like I said, the longer, the deeper you, the more amount you have in your cup, the less time you have to work with it. Because there's more in there to heat up. And the hotter it gets, the faster it starts to set. And a lot of times, if you get a thicker pour on one of your other ones, and there's that dimple, you can pull that into another area. So we got the top half there. Now we just need the bottom half. Actually, it worked out to be. See, there was a nice thick pour. So now I'm going to have to work on spreading that out. And sometimes it just happens. You can't get frustrated about it, just work with it. See, there was enough there, about a 1 inch gap between the two pores. I was able to spread it out and fill that entire gap. Actually, that ended up being enough to between all the pores to fill everything. So I'm going to take and run sideways to make sure we're nice and smooth across the entire way. One prolonged blast every 5 seconds. Foghorns. So I think we got it smoothed out pretty good on that whole thing. So now let's get the bottom. I had a really heavy hand mixing here, so I'm going to try my best to not get quite as much on the bottom because I want to try and keep some of that grip on the edges there. And a lot of times if I have 2 cups going at once, I'll mix up enough epoxy to do both cups in one shot. But with the other project, it was epoxy on top of the glitter. So what ended up happening was I got glitter into the epoxy and I didn't want to get the glitter on this final coat. So I got a good coating on the bottom. So now it's just a matter of smoothing it out. Start in the middle, pull it to the bottom, and then as it rotates around, it'll allow itself to smooth out. And other than a few bubbles, I think it's coming out very nicely. All right, I think we got the bottom pretty good. So now, got a good coat on everything, and I was really heavy-handed when I was pouring my epoxy mixtures. But now I'm going to go through, actually I'm going to keep hold of this in case I got excess that I need to wipe off. I'm going to start a little bit past middle. And bring it, wrap it up along the edge there. And this should turn out very, very nicely. I don't feel any bumps as I'm smoothing it out. It's smoothing out very nicely. And as you do this a few times, it doesn't take very long to really get a feel for it. You'll be able to feel the difference between smooth and when there's spots you really need to focus on, or even thick and thin. And then you do the same, start a little bit past middle. Because if you always start right in the middle, you end up with a ridge in the middle. And then one more time at the bottom. And then take the gloves off. All we have left is to apply the heat gun. But I'm going to let that sit for a few minutes, let the bubbles all surface, let it settle out, and we'll apply the heat gun to it. All right, so now we're going to apply the heat gun to it. It's been rotating a few minutes here, and I can definitely see some bubbles that have formed. So I'm going to use my heat gun. I'm going to turn it on and apply some heat to it. You don't want to apply heat to one specific area. You want to keep it moving. And yeah, we'll show you how it looks after that. All right, so it looks like we got all the bubbles popped. So my heat gun is variable. It goes all the way up to 1300 degrees. I've got mine set about 650, which does perfect. Doesn't overheat the epoxy, which can prematurely start it setting. So you just want to keep it moving. Nice. Doesn't even have to be very smooth. So I do want to say I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but one of the things I like about these silicone cups is that once you're done using it, you can either use the leftover epoxy for something else, or you can just set it there, let it set up, and then you just pull the leftover epoxy right out. And it's real easy cleanup. I just roll it around in my fingers. This cup here is one that I used before. You can see in here, I just pulled some out. All it does is leaves these little chunks once you pull the big chunk out. I take it inside, wash it up, soap and water, and wipe it down with some alcohol, takes any excess left out, and it's ready to go for the next time. So that's all we have. Thanks for joining me today, and y'all have a great rest of your day. Don't forget to continue to experiment, figure out what works best for you, try different styles, different patterns, different methods. Maybe mine will work for you, maybe it won't, but figure out what works best for you. Keep crafting, keep doing your thing, have fun with it. And until next time, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a great day.